Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us on our third webinar in the LIFE Moor Space webinar series. So today's species spotlight is looking into the Large Heath Butterfly on Thorne moors and the reintroduction of the Large Heath by Lancashire Wildlife Trust on Chat Moss. So I'm Lewis Wheeler. I'm the project officer for the LIFE Moor Space project, which is a restoration project, an EU-funded restoration project on Thorne moors. And we've got Mike Longdon with us today, who is the peatland programme technical lead for Lancashire Wildlife Trust. And he led on the reintroduction over at Chat Moss. So cameras and microphones are off for the session, but it is being recorded to share online at a later date. Any questions that anyone's got can be popped into the Q&A function, and we'll address these at the end of the session. So to put us into a bit of context, I'm based on Thorne Moors, which is a Natural England site. It's a national nature reserve and part of the larger Humberhead peatlands, which is a remnant wetland from thousands of years ago. We were a SSI, an SAC and an SBA, and it's considered a degraded raised bog that's capable of natural regeneration. It supports a wide range of sort of specialised species, including the large heath, which is what we're here to discuss today, but as well we've got the Thorne pimpalp beetle, which is found nowhere else in the UK, and it also supports breeding nightjar as per our SPA designation. Ooh. So, as most of our peatlands, Thorne has been cut throughout recorded history for peat, initially through hand cutting, and then with modernisation and mechanisation, the moors were mechanically cut, leaving behind peatlands in a fairly desperate need of restoration. We've got fairly variable water levels across site, which has been left behind, which has hindered our natural reformation of peat. So part of the EU LIFE Moor Space project is to help with that restoration and kickstart that restoration process. Just across the border from us, separated by the Swinefleet drain, which is the area of red, is Crowle Moors, which is owned by Lancashire Wildlife Trust, who are a partner in the LIFE Moor Space project. Unlike Thorne, Crowle was never mechanically cut for peat, so peat depths are a bit more generous there, with up to 5 metres in places and a 3 metre average across the site. Crowle is also a SSI, part of the Thorne, Goole and Crowle Moor SSI, and it's also home to the Peatland Railway. The Peatland Railway is a volunteer-run organisation operating on North Links council land and showcases some of the trains that we use to remove peat from the moors. So whilst it's not part of the restoration, it is a piece of history of the moors. And that little engine down in the right-hand corner of your screen is called Little Pete, and that was recovered from Thorne Moors and restored with the local engineering college. So it's quite a nice place that showcases the history of the moors. And then we've got the Large Heath, which is why we're all here today. So the Large Heath, for those that don't really know it, is a brown butterfly as part of the brown butterfly family and is considered a small to medium butterfly. It's a wet, boggy habitat specialist, which is why we find it on our peatlands, and it's restricted to sites in the north of England, Ireland, Scotland, and a few sites in Wales and central England. So the Butterfly Conservation have this distribution map, and Thorne Moors is over on the east coast near the Humber Estuary, and then you've got a couple of sites south in Wales and Wixall Moss area. The species itself is protected under various designations around the UK, although the species has seen significant decline in England and Wales. The spots on the underwing, so when the large heath comes to rest, it always rests with its wings closed, and you can see the spots on the underwing. Now these spots vary with the species. We get a heavily spotted version on Thorne, like in these pictures, whereas up in Scotland you can have the large heath that's virtually spotless. So they do vary a little bit within the species. If you don't really know what you're looking for, they can look a little similar to the meadow brown, and quite similar to the small heath butterfly, although we don't get the small heath on Thorne. In terms of food, the caterpillar's food plant is mainly hare's tail cotton grass, and the butterfly looks for cross-leafed heath, which is a sort of a heather that can stand wet ground. So that's the food plant for the butterfly. Now the larvae tend to emerge in March and pupate in April, May, and then the survey season for the butterfly starts at the end of May and runs to kind of mid-July. Now the tricky thing with doing the large heath surveys is the specific conditions in which the butterfly will fly. They're quite an erratic flyer, and they need the weather to be above 14 degrees with little rain and very little wind, which is a combination that's quite difficult to find in the UK. So you do find you're watching the weather through the survey season to try and find where you can get out and actually survey for them. So we've decided to this year to have a look at the caterpillars. Now the larvae are found to be quite sensitive to high water levels, so high rainfall can impact their survivability. But we thought we could have a look at the caterpillars, which you can see in the centre of your screen there. The green with a white stripe down is the caterpillar, and we're looking to maybe do some surveys for these in the subsequent seasons. They're quite difficult to find. We went up twice for most of the day and found 12 the first time we went out and 2 the second time. But we're gonna persist with that over the next couple of years and see if we can establish a good way to survey for these caterpillars. So on to some of the surveying that we've done on large heath at Thorne. I'll show some footage of some of the butterflies that we get. So Thorne uses the UK butterfly monitoring scheme methodology, and we follow fixed transects for the season. We've got a fairly established group of volunteers who help with our surveying, and during the Moor Space project we're running volunteer workshops to try and boost those numbers and enable us to survey more and more areas. But surveying generally covers a set of long transects that cover the majority of the site, which you can see on that map of our butterfly transects. And then we established 2 short transects, which are in orange and red up on the northeast side of Thorne Moors. And these were established so we could regularly survey for large heath on a more regular basis. But the historical transect, which you can see down in the canals area in grey, this was first monitored in the 1980s and has been regularly monitored since, although there's been slight changes to the process between then and now. Now down in the canals area, which is in the southern part of Thorne, peat was extracted mainly by hand, and so these areas contain the most well-established mire communities on site. We've got all the species that you'd expect to find, from common and hare's tail cotton grass, various sphagnum species. We get sundew down there, cross-leafed heath, bog rosemary, and bog cranberry. So this area called the canals area is very good for large heath. It's also been surveyed the longest. So rewetting and restoration in this area started in 1979, after which we kind of saw a steady rise in the population of Large Heath, peaking in 2013. Because the restoration of that area was so successful, the access to the transects down there became very difficult. So whilst the historical transect was put in place in the 1980s, we've had to modify those transects to be able to actually access them. From 2013 to 2015, we started to see a rapid decline in numbers, the reasons being relatively unknown, but there is evidence that the butterfly is moving more north across the site. So we had to rationalize our resources in sort of 2022 time. With a lack of volunteers, we actually established 2 short transects, which we saw previously, and these are monitored weekly to give us the annual butterfly index and allow us to establish a flight curve for the season. Then the longer transects are walked at least once, and we can use the flight curve to estimate the annual abundance for the area that long transect is in. So this is a well-established sort of method. As you can see in the flight curve, the numbers in 2024 were significantly lower than in 2022 and 2023. So the flight curve's a bit tentative, but the peak definitely does occur a couple of weeks later than it did in 2022 and 2023. And we suspect that was because of the poor weather in June of last year. So there are 2 other lowland sites that have been doing transects for Large Heath. We've got the Natural Resources Wales site called Cors Fogno in Ceredigion. My Welsh is not very good. I do have Welsh ancestry, so I hope they're not disappointed with that pronunciation, but I think that's correct. And also Wixall Moss, which is a Natural England site in North Shropshire. So there's a fairly broad brush approach to comparison, but it does highlight that the low numbers that we've been getting in the canals area, which has previously been one of the best spots for Large Heath on site. The newer areas that we've been monitoring with the short transects further north on Thorne have more comparative numbers to the other lowland sites in England. But generally across the board, there is a bit of a decline in the Large Heath. So as part of the LIFE Moor Space project, we're establishing a diverse mix of Maya vegetation to try and boost numbers of Large Heath in the area, as well as covering some of our bare peat areas. So we've undertaken cotton grass and sphagnum planting to try and improve the quality of habitat up there and introduce more food plant for the caterpillars. And then, much like any sort of peatland restoration project, improving the water levels and controlling scrub and heather will generally make a good impact for Large Heath. The better the site, the better it is for Large Heath, being the species that it is. And finally, just before I pass over to Mike to talk about the reintroduction project, I just wanted to touch on a study that's been undertaken as part of the Moor Space project. So it's a fairly small scale study, but it's looking to see whether the Large Heath could be used as a bioindicator for improving peatland conditions. Now, it seems fairly reasonable to suggest that it can be, as the better the peatland, you would expect the Large Heath would be fairly happy with that. But as it's only small scale, it does have some limitations. The time that we have to do the study is fairly small. When I started this role in 2023, the butterfly season was kind of already underway. So in 2024 was when we could first start collecting baseline data in the project area. We can use a little bit from the short transects that we've got from previous years, but generally a lot of the monitoring has been done in the more southern parts of the moor, so we don't have a lot of baseline data for this area. There's also variables that can't be controlled, the big one being the weather, which would have an impact on the study, and the transect that was established, which is in yellow at the north end of Thorne Moors, is not the best habitat for large heath. Either side of the transect is good habitat, and it's the area that we are helping to restore and make better. But the transect itself is along a limestone track. Now, the reason we chose that is because it's going to be repeatable for the longest amount of time. Unlike the historic transect, which got flooded out as the water levels raised, the track should be fairly well established for a while whilst the water levels raise up. That being said, we've got the new transect set up, and in 2024 we found 4 large heath in the area across the season. So hopefully, as our restoration work continues, we'll see a boost in those numbers. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and pass over to Mike.
Morning, everybody. Bear with me while I share my screen. Can you see that, Lewis?
Yeah, that's all coming through.
Yep. So, hello, everybody. As Lewis said, for those who don't know me, my name is Mike Longdon from Lancashire Wildlife Trust and Liverpool John Moores University, where I work as the Peatland Programme Technical Lead. And I was very fortunate when I first started with the Trust in 2017 that they were starting to think about the reintroduction of the large heath to Chat Moss. From there, as part of my role at the time as a project officer, I was able to get the funding and be the co-lead on the project to actually deliver to reintroduce large heath back to Chat Moss from an absence of over 150 years. You can see just on the aerial photo on my introduction slide that this is one of the areas where we had, due to a feasibility study, identified that it was suitable for large heath, and this was one of the main locations for the reintroduction on the site we chose. So today we're going to talk about where we released and a bit of history about Chat Moss itself, the protocols we followed, the history of large heath within the northwest, habitat requirements that we were looking for, obviously slightly covered by Lewis a minute ago, go through the details of the feasibility study, the monitoring that we've done, the reintroduction itself, the key learnings, and what we're planning on doing next within the project. So where is Chat Moss? Chat Moss is literally, if you look at the map on the left-hand side, you can see that it's in the Greater Manchester in the borough of Salford, and that Chat Moss plays part of the Greater Manchester Wetlands Nature Improvement Area, and within there, in the kind of late 2010, it was designated as a special area of conservation. The peat area itself is about 20,000 hectares. Most of 96% of that has been that habitat has been lost through drainage and mainly for agriculture, but also for encroachment from urban areas. So, and that kind of sped up around this late 1700s, 1800s, which kind of led to the kind of loss of what is for Greater Manchester an iconic species, the large heath from the area. So it was always part of what the trust wanted to do, was to target that. And so we, within the SAC area, if you look at the map on the right hand side, you can see the kind of we were trying to identify the stepping stones that are restorable, but in 2018 we didn't know what a large heath required and what the conditions of those sites were for the large heath. But so we kind of kept a very open mind, and eventually, based on the data we had, we chose Astley Moss, which is on the top north of the screen, which are triple SI, and probably alongside Risley, which is at the south, the two best examples of lowland raised bog within the Chat Moss area. So when we were starting to talk about reintroductions, for us, the Large Heath wasn't just about, the Large Heath was the poster boy. It was something we wanted to bring back, but it wasn't just about that. It was about creating the right habitat, restoring ecosystem functionality across the peatlands that we were working to restore. So we managed to get funding from the earlier for the reintroduction project, but only a small part of that was based on the actual Large Heath reintroduction. Through this project and through using the Large Heath, we were able to reintroduce over 10 other species of plants to the area, but specifically targeting the two that Lewis mentioned earlier, which was the cross-leaved heath and the Ayer's-tail cotton grass. But we also reintroduced two varieties of sundew through the project, and also lesser bladderwort as well. And the way we did that is we worked very closely with Liverpool John Moores University and somebody there called Sarah Dalrymple, who now sits on the task force for reintroductions for Natural England. And the idea was we wanted to really follow the IUCN guidelines, which we are currently now updating our reintroduction policy and protocols to fit the new Natural England guidelines, which are currently in the works. So and what we concentrated on was every translocation to have clearly defined goals. So and also historic, was it there before, and is there suitable habitat? And for that, we had to do a lot of library searches. We knew the Large Heath, which is in the Greater Manchester area, known as the Manchester August, was around, and the last record we found was from 150 years ago in about 1850. But before that, it was quite widely recorded. So we knew it had been in the area, and then we could define from other work that we'd done, and obviously the loss of habitat, that it was mainly down to suitable habitat. So then we had to make sure that the areas that we were looking at had the suitable habitat to actually reintroduce it. And this work started back in 2018 with the kind of reintroduction only taking place in 2020. So there was a lot of work and commitment from the Trust and its partners, including Natural England and Warrington Ranger Service, to actually make sure that we understood this and got the background information that we needed. As well as a couple of knowledge partners in Liverpool John Moores and Manchester Met University. We also wanted to make sure and had to prove that there would be no risk to the population of the donor site as well as receptor sites, and obviously had to put in place a long-term monitoring program based on the translocations, but not just for the Large Heath itself, but also for the plants we were reintroducing as well. And because a lot of the sites we were working in, and it was a protected species, we had to do a lot of work around the permissions to do the reintroduction as well. So the history of Large Heath in the area, the Large Heath was, as I said, was widespread in the northwest of England, going from kind of Fens and Wigsall, which is kind of one of the southern locations in Shropshire, all the way up through Cheshire into Chat Moss, and then all the way up to the Lake District, with sites like within Forest of Bowland and Marley Moss, which was another Lancashire Wildlife Trust reserve, and it was also reintroduced to Easham Moss in 2016 as well. So and we want to kind of recreate that spread of it. One of the things that we had to figure out was that there is, as Lewis mentioned, there is 3 subspecies within the UK, and we had to figure out which one we had, which we found was the Davos subspecies. And when we were looking for a donor site, one of the things we realised was that for the one on the Forest of Bowlands, which from geographically was probably the closest, was actually a different subspecies than what would have been found within Chat Moss originally. So we had to kind of do that work to separate where making sure the right subspecies was uh, reintroduced to the area. So most of what's left within Bowland Fells and with Marley Moss were considered to be isolated and vulnerable. So part of the project as well was to long-term safeguard the Marley Moss population. And as I mentioned, it went extinct. The last record was just 1850. So and again, that kind of coincides with massive amounts of drainage within the peatlands based on the Stevenson Railway, which crossed between Manchester and Liverpool straight across Chat Moss, and finally gave people access to an area which had been inhabitable but also very difficult to farm until that point. So I won't dwell too much on this, but the habitat, as Lewis has already gone through it, but the butterfly breeds in open wet areas where the food plants grow, which is the cross-leaved heath for the butterfly and a hairtail cotton grass for the caterpillar as well. And one of the important things about the caterpillar realized about and what data and what previous research has showed was it wasn't just about the actual food available to the caterpillar, it was about the tussock size of the hairtail cotton grass. So those who don't know what the hairtail cotton grass looks like, it's quite a tussocky plant, and what happens is over the winter is the caterpillar, the eggs will actually kind of stay within there, and when it comes out it uses the tussocks as protection from predators, but also it can actually there is research that suggests when it comes out and if it's still wet it can survive underwater for a period of time as well. So they're quite hardy little characters and need to be for where they're found. Sites are usually below 500 meters and have a lot of sphagnum moss interspersed with a food plant, which is one of the reasons why we wanted to improve the habitat at the same time across the site, because it allows for natural spread of the species that we're hoping to achieve in the long term. And obviously the main food plants are there, and one of the problems being is that the degraded peats don't have any of the habitat there. So we had to really map all of this through the feasibility. 2018, we carried out feasibility to understand what the Large Heath required and link this to our potential sites in partnership with Manchester Met Uni, a master's student who is now doing a PhD on the Large Heath called Andre Osborne, helped a lot with this. And what the kind of ordination on the right of the screen shows the areas. So what we did was basically we chose 5 sites that we were planning on reintroducing it to and where we knew it was missing from, and then 5 sites that we knew it was present within, and did full vegetation surveys of those areas to understand what species were required, where they were present and what was absent. And you can see that though it kind of really outlined the kind of species mix that we needed to look at for those areas within the sites that we wanted to reintroduce it compared to those that were absent. So we wanted, the kind of ones that were major were things like Juncus and Malinia, which is purple moorgrass, and those are the areas where we weren't finding on there, and the Erica there. So the food plants were all there, was where we were present, and that started us to be able to then narrow down the search. But we didn't just want to look at the vegetation, we also did something very similar with the biotic and abiotic factors, looking at the pH, the number of but also things like the tussock base, how wide they were, the sphagnum hummock heights. And one of the things that really shone out was the pH, the kind of and the lack of bare peat and lack of conductivity were really important when we were looking at the areas that are done to reintroduce. So that again narrowed it down further. And then when you actually look at that from a site-specific base, we created this area where we were looking. So all the ones on the right-hand side are all where there is presence of large heath. The ones on the left-hand side, that is, the ones on the right side were the ones we wanted to had highlighted as most likely to be ready for reintroduction. And the ones that were closest were Risley, Orcroft and Astley. And Astley was chosen mainly due to the fact that the site was easy to access for ourselves, but wasn't permitted access to the general public, so we could control disturbance and stuff and things like that. But it was still found to have the amount of food plants and habitat requirements required for the project to go forward. The other part of what we were looking at was the percentage area of the two main species of food plants, so the cross-leaved heath and the amount of common cotton grass. And Astley moss was the closest to both Winmarleigh and Meathop. So you can see Astley moss in the first column there. It sat really, really closely with the number of plants that was required. What we did since then and before release, so this was done in 2018, is we also planted extra plants of those species within the actual area, so we'd have enough. And one of the things, and this was based on a paper by Osborne et al., which I was great to be involved in, showed that Erica, if you actually look at the minimum requirements of the food plants, vaginatum, so hairstail cotton grass needed, you need to have at least 55.6% cover of that before you would start looking at a reintroduction. And the cross-leaved heath needed a minimum of 11%, and that kind of really informed down which sites were more suitable for that. And that's where we really targeted our release and our planting and long-term management of the sites for cross-leaved heath, for large heath at that point, were informed by a lot of this data, and it really helped us to kind of streamline our thinking around large heath and the reintroduction. So the monitoring of the sites, of the receptor site and the site for the release site as well, was really important. So again, we follow the same methodology that Lewis mentioned, so I won't go that into too much detail. And we also wanted to make sure that that we weren't having a negative effect by removing the gravid females from the site to release into our special captive breeding program, which we did in conjunction with Chester Zoo. So we did 3 years of counts beforehand, and we've done 5 years of counts since then of the Large Heath Butterfly at the donor site, and to make sure that that hasn't been affected by the work. But we've also done a lot of management around, similar to what Lewis mentioned, around scrub control and re-wetting work, so that is your standard bog restoration, to actually create a stronger population. And what we've seen from that data and from our surveys on the donor site, which was Winmarleigh moss, is a greater spread of the species across the site, which has been done. We also worked very closely with Butterfly Conservation from the beginning on this project to actually, one, go through and learn the monitoring techniques, but also make sure that we were following all the guidelines that they advised us on as well. So what we decided to do was have a captive breeding. So in the summer of 2019, we went out and captured 6 gravid females and 1 male, and they were taken to Chester Zoo. The gravid females were then released into a purpose-built cage full of cotton grass and the cross-leaved heath. And after a few weeks, the first caterpillars emerged from the eggs, laid inside the breeding cage, and that's where they overwintered in them. And once they were overwintered, they started to become more mobile again. And as of that stage, we waited till they were pupas and then took them to the release site at Astley once they had pupated. And you can see they were checked regularly by the staff at Chester Zoo throughout the year, who've had much experience in this kind of release on tropical species as well as UK species. So the reintroduction itself, the picture on the bottom left, you can see one of my colleagues, Martin, going around actually capturing the butterflies for the first stage of the release. And then you can see the caterpillar itself was on the next photo, was taken by Chester Zoo using macro lenses to actually. It's the first time we could really see them up close, and as Louis said, they're really hard to find in the wild, so it was really good to understand that part of the life and actually see them for the first time. And then you can see in the central picture is the pupas. So once they form the pupas, we'd stick them to canes, and the canes were then put into a special butterfly tent that we put out on site, on the release site, and every morning and evening we would check that any had hatched from the pupa, and at that point we would release them into the wild. And the picture on the right hand side there shows one freshly emerged from one of the pupas. So the monitoring of the population site, it was, I've spoke to Lewis a few times about this and other people on other sites, and with our kind of flight patterns are very, very similar. One of the things we found at Winmarleigh was that the butterfly was coming out probably 2 weeks earlier up until last year, where it came out in a very similar time at the middle of June. But one of the things we've found is that the flight although there will be small numbers throughout a 6 to 7 week period, there is a main 2 week period to actually monitor those, and it becomes a very large task that we're just planning now for this year to actually go out and monitor. The transects we use are very have been in place for over 5 years now, but can be quite hard going. And we take 3 people out because there's a large number of times where at least 2 of those people are face down in the habitat because they've fallen over while looking for the butterflies. So it's always an experience. You can see from the survey data that it's 2020 was the best year on the donor site. Since then, we've had pretty stable numbers over the period until last year, which we're putting down to the weather. If you look at the release site data from 2022, we were getting really good flight numbers. We'd released approximately 100 butterflies over a 2-year period by that point, and then we've had a steady decline from 23, 24. 25, ignore that figure. I don't know why that went into the graph. It was a mistake on my part. But one of the things we've done from this data is we've looked at the site and a lot of the key factors, and to see what it says. What we have put down 2024's low figures to is very much similar to the national pattern, where both 23 and 24 being really wet years has had a really bad effect on populations across the UK of the Large Heath Butterfly, and we're positive with the dry weather that we've had in the last few months that we're going to have a good year this year. So one of the other things that we've been monitoring, we've been working with Manchester Met University, and the same person who helped us with the feasibility, Andy, who's released a few papers now on the Large Heath, and he's doing it as part of his PhD. One of the things we were really interested in understanding was how they fly, how fast they move. So you can see on the map on the left hand side, you can see the kind of vegetation patterns, and then you can see the kind of, this was within the first year they stayed very, very close to home, And this is between 2018 and 2020, sorry, and 2022. But by 2022, they'd started to disperse further and further, and that kind of coincided with where the perfect habitat was. So they were definitely following the habitat, and within this, we've used this information to actually inform our management, and we've continued to plant in the directions going kind of southwest on the map, which is towards another meta population area that we're hoping to reintroduce to next year, so we can create that dynamics, more natural dynamics for the large heath butterfly, which does tend to use a very meta population way of the males tend to fly a lot more than the females do, because they're already gravid when they come out of the pupa. So we need to be ready to with the shot they don't like to travel very far, whereas the males tend to travel further looking for mates. So the key learnings from the reintroduction: sightings during transit have been decreasing, which has led us to review focus on the following. We looked at the hydrology, food requirements, comparing data from other sites. But one of the positives we had, except from 20 up to 24, we were getting 90 plus flights a year recorded from a different study by MMU based. That wasn't using the same transect methodology, so I haven't presented the data there. So until last year, we were really happy with the population, and what we're putting it down to at the moment is the fact that last year was a bad year in general for butterflies, and we're hoping that this year's data will be crucial to the planning for our long-term things for the project. So what we're doing next, so there's new releases planned for 2026. What we're going to be doing within those plans as well is we're looking at releases is changing it. So rather than going to Chester Zoo, one of the things we found, due to the short flight periods between us finding we've got the numbers to go and collect, it's usually 2 to 3 days, potentially a week, before we can get everything in place to get the butterflies to Chester Zoo. And within that time period, we think a lot of the butterflies are laying their eggs within the donor site, rather than within Chester Zoo. So what we're looking at doing is the days we get the maximum numbers and we think there's enough to capture, we'll then capture on the day and take straight to the release sites within Astley Moss. Again, this is a methodology that's been very successful in Europe, and we're looking at using this methodology going forward to see if we can get more eggs and more caterpillars to the site to reinforce the population. We're continuing our planting of Airstail and cross-leaved heath through across the site in a strategic way based on the data we have. Also, we're starting this year to do some supplementary feeding of nectar source for the butterfly. One of the reasons behind this is one of the things we've noticed is that the cross-leaved heath tends, because the butterfly seems to be, except from last year, coming out about 2 weeks on average earlier, there isn't as much nectar source available at that period, and so we're going to be doing supplementary nectar feeding as of this year. We're also going to be looking from 2027 to release to a couple of other sites. This in the next 12 months, we'll be doing feasibility, redoing the feasibility, but looking at the new habitat we've created across the Chat Moss area to see if we can start creating meta populations within the areas that we want to recreate that more natural dynamic that we want to do. We're also evaluating a lot of our monitoring techniques and looking at ways that we can use kind of remote sensing potentially, especially around vegetation, to actually be able to utilize and inform decision making. Thank you very much, and that's me done.